May 1945. American soldiers forced German civilians from the nearby town of Weimar to walk through Buchenwald concentration camp. The Americans film everything. Women cover their faces. Men look away. Some faint. Others vomit. And almost all of them say the same thing. We didn't know. But here's the problem with that claim. Buchenwald wasn't hidden in a remote forest. It sat on Ettersberg Hill, visible from Weimar below. The camp had been there since 1937. For 8 years, smoke rose from its chimneys. For 8 years, trains delivered prisoners. For 8 years, the smell of burning bodies drifted over the town when the wind changed direction. A Weimar housewife named Ilse Schmidt would later admit in a private letter, "We smelled it on certain days. We just told ourselves it must be the factory or the hospital burning medical waste. We didn't ask questions because we didn't want answers." This pattern repeated across Germany. Dachau, near Munich. Sachsenhausen, near Berlin. Mauthausen in Austria. All near populated areas. All operating for years. So let's examine what German civilians actually knew, what they chose not to know, and how information about the Holocaust spread through German society despite official secrecy. Before we talk about concentration camps, we need to talk about what happened in German cities themselves. Because the first phase of persecution wasn't secret at all. November 9th, 1938. Kristallnacht. In every major German city, synagogues burned. Jewish shops were destroyed. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to camps. This wasn't a covert operation at midnight. It happened during the day, in city centers, on main streets. A Berlin shopkeeper named Hans Berger kept a diary. He wrote, "Walked to work this morning. The Goldstein shop on the corner was completely destroyed. Glass everywhere. Someone had painted Jude on the door. People were walking past like nothing happened. I kept walking too. Then came the deportations. Starting in October 1941, Jews across Germany were ordered to assembly points. In Berlin, they gathered at the Levitzstrasse synagogue before being taken to trains. Thousands of people, neighbors, co-workers, school teachers, they disappeared one trainload at a time. Elisabeth Giebelsleben lived in Berlin. In her letters, she wrote, "The Rosenthals from apartment 4B were taken away last Tuesday. They left their door open. Someone already took their furniture by evening. No one talks about where they went, but everyone knows they're not coming back." The trains left from regular stations. Grunewald in Berlin, the main station in Munich. These weren't hidden sidings in the middle of the night. Railway workers loaded the cars. Station managers managed the schedules. Police supervised the boarding. And ordinary Germans on their way to work walked past platforms packed with Jewish families carrying suitcases. A German railway official named Otto Stang later testified, "We all knew they were deportation trains. Where do we think they were going? We told ourselves it was resettlement in the East. Work camps. That's what the paperwork said. Did we believe it? I don't know. We didn't discuss it." By late 1942, nearly all Jews had been deported from German cities. Entire neighborhoods emptied. Synagogues stood abandoned. Jewish-owned shops had been Aryanized and taken over by German owners. This didn't happen invisibly. Every German in every city watched their Jewish neighbors disappear. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because while the Nazi regime tried to keep the final solution secret, thousands of German soldiers serving in Poland and the Soviet Union couldn't keep their mouths shut. In 1942, a German soldier named Karl Kretschmer was serving with a police battalion in Ukraine. He wrote home to his wife, "Dear Sonia, yesterday we had to shoot women and children. It's the worst thing I've ever done. There were babies. I can't stop thinking about it. They say it's necessary, that they're partisans, but Sonia, they were just people." That letter exists in archives today. It's one of thousands like it. Wehrmacht soldiers wrote letters home describing mass shootings. Some expressed horror. Some expressed casual indifference. Some tried to justify it. But they wrote about it. They told their families what they were seeing, what they were doing. Historians estimate that millions of letters came back from the Eastern Front between 1941 and 1944. Not all mentioned killings, but enough did that information spread through German society like water seeping through cracks. A woman named Pauline Meyer lived in Stuttgart. In her diary from 1943, she wrote, "My brother sent a letter from Poland. He can't say much, but he mentioned that terrible things are happening to Jews there. He seemed very upset. Mother burned the letter after reading it. At church last Sunday, Frau Becker whispered that her son had written something similar. We didn't discuss it further. Then there were the soldiers on leave. Men came home from the east and drank in beer halls. They talked, sometimes in whispers, sometimes loudly after too much alcohol. A bar owner in Munich named Ludwig Hartmann later testified, "You'd hear things. Soldiers would come in, get drunk, and talk about shootings, about pits full of bodies, about entire villages liquidated. Most people didn't want to hear it. They'd change the subject or leave. But the information was there, floating around, if you were willing to listen. The SS and Gestapo tried to suppress this information. Soldiers were told not to write about operations. Spreading atrocity rumors was officially forbidden. But you can't seal the mouths of millions of men who've witnessed mass murder. The information leaked constantly. Let's talk about the people who lived next to the camps. Because this is where the claim, "we didn't know," becomes impossible to maintain. Take Dachau. The camp opened in 1933, just outside Munich. It wasn't hidden. The SS used it as a model. They gave tours to foreign dignitaries. Local businesses supplied the camp food, construction materials, uniforms. The town of Dachau had a population of about 13,000 during the war. The camp held up to 30,000 prisoners. A Dachau resident named Anna Prohl later admitted, "We saw the prisoners working outside the camp sometimes, on road details, construction projects. They looked like skeletons in striped uniforms. We saw the SS guards beating them. Everyone in town knew the camp was there. How could we not? It employed people from our town." Or Mauthausen in Austria. The camp sat on a hill overlooking the town. Prisoners cut granite in a quarry. Local residents could see them working. They could hear the guards shouting, the gunshots, the screams. An Austrian teacher named Franz Rath kept notes that were found decades later. The children ask about the camp on the hill. "I don't know what to tell them. We tell ourselves it's a prison for criminals. But everyone knows people die there constantly. Sometimes bodies are brought down to the town crematorium when the camp crematorium can't keep up. The crematorium operator, Herr Muller, he's a drunk now. He drinks to forget what he does all day." Auschwitz is the most famous case. The camp complex sprawled across 15 square miles. It had multiple sections: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II Birkenau, Auschwitz III Monowitz. The town of Auschwitz, which Germans called Auschwitz, sat right next to the camp. A Polish resident who survived the German occupation later testified. The smell was constant. When they were burning bodies at Birkenau, you could smell it for miles. The Germans who lived in the town, they smelled it too. They knew. Some would hold handkerchiefs to their faces when the wind was raw. But they stayed. They worked. They lived their lives. Then there's the case of the IG Farben factory at Monowitz. This was a massive industrial complex that used concentration camp labor. Thousands of German engineers, managers, and technicians worked there. They saw the skeletal prisoners every single day. They saw them work to death. A German engineer named Otto Ambros was later prosecuted at Nuremberg. During his trial, evidence showed he'd written reports about prisoner death rates. He'd complained that sick prisoners were affecting production efficiency. He knew. They all knew. Here's something most people don't know. Information about the Holocaust was broadcast into Germany. Allied radio stations transmitted in German throughout the war. And some Germans listened despite it being illegal. The BBC German service reported on Nazi atrocities. In December 1942, the BBC broadcast specific information about the extermination of Jews. They mentioned Auschwitz by name. They gave numbers. They described gas chambers. A German woman named Else Wendell kept a secret diary. She listened to BBC broadcasts on hidden radio. She wrote in January 1943, "The BBC says Jews are being gassed in camps in Poland. They say millions have been killed. Can this be true? It sounds impossible. But then I remember the deportations. Where did all those people go? None have returned." The Catholic Church also spread information. Some priests learned about the killings through church networks in Poland. A few brave ones mentioned it in sermons, speaking in coded language. Bishop Clemens von Galen in Münster preached against the Nazi euthanasia program in 1941. He didn't mention Jews specifically, but he talked about the murder of undesirables and useless eaters. His sermons were copied and circulated. Thousands of Germans read them. And then there were the resistors. The White Rose student group in Munich distributed leaflets in 1942 and 1943. Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans wrote, "Every day, thousands of Jews are being murdered in Poland. We know this. The German people know this. Silence makes us accomplices. They were caught and executed. But their leaflets were read by hundreds of people before the Gestapo shut them down. The point is, information was available. You had to be willing to risk listening to illegal radio. You had to be willing to read forbidden leaflets. You had to be willing to believe uncomfortable truths. But the information was there. Most Germans chose not to seek it out. They chose to believe the official story. Jews were being resettled in the East. They were working in labor camps. It was better not to ask questions. A German businessman named Dieter Wislicini, who was later prosecuted for war crimes, said something revealing in his testimony. Did ordinary Germans know about the extermination? Many suspected. Some new details. But most chose a comfortable middle ground. They knew enough to be worried, but not enough to feel responsible. They protected themselves with deliberate ignorance. Here's the complicated truth. Most Germans didn't know the complete picture, but almost all of them knew pieces. A factory worker in Hamburg knew Jews had been deported. A soldier's wife in Frankfurt knew terrible things were happening in the East. A farmer near Dachau knew the camp prisoners were dying. A railway worker in Berlin knew the transport trains were going somewhere bad. Each person had a fragment of knowledge, and each person made a choice about what to do with that fragment. Most chose to look away. Historian Peter Longerich studied this phenomenon. He found that Germans practiced what he called selective perception. They absorbed information that confirmed their existing beliefs and blocked out information that challenged them. If you believed Jews were dangerous enemies of Germany, you interpreted deportations as necessary security measures. If you believed the Nazi propaganda about subhumans, you didn't think too hard about what happened to them. If you were focused on surviving bombing raids and feeding your family, you didn't have mental energy left to think about Jews. This is human psychology. It's not unique to Germans, but the scale of what happened in Germany makes it particularly important to understand. Let me give you a specific example. In 1943, a German civilian named Ursula von Kardorf lived in Berlin. She kept a diary. She was anti-Nazi, connected to resistance circles. She wrote about bombs falling on Berlin, about friends killed in air raids, about the increasing hardships of daily life. In October 1943, she wrote, "Ran into Ruth at the market. She whispered that her husband heard something terrible from a colleague who'd been in Poland. Something about mass killings. I didn't want to hear more. I know I should care, but I'm so tired. I just want this war to end." That's the reality for many Germans. They were living through their own trauma, bombing raids, food shortages, sons dying on the Eastern Front. The suffering of Jews felt distant, abstract, maybe even deserved in the mind of some. Their own suffering felt immediate and all-consuming. This doesn't excuse anything, but it explains how a society can function alongside genocide. People compartmentalize. They prioritize their own survival. They tell themselves comforting lies. There's also the factor of fear. Speaking out was dangerous. Listening to foreign radio was illegal. Questioning the regime could get you arrested. Harboring Jews meant death. A Munich woman named Anna Huber hid a Jewish friend in her attic for 2 years. After the war, she said, "I knew if I was caught, they'd kill me and my children. My neighbors would have turned me in without hesitation." Most people weren't brave like the people we celebrate now. Most people were scared and selfish, including me. I only helped one person. I could have done more. When Allied forces liberated the camps in 1945, they made a decision. German civilians would be forced to see what had been done in their name. General Dwight Eisenhower personally ordered German civilians living near concentration camps to tour them. He said, "The German people must know what has been done. They must see it with their own eyes." In Weimar, American soldiers marched over 1,000 civilians through Buchenwald. They made them walk past piles of corpses. They made them look at the crematorium. They made them see the torture rooms, the medical experiment areas, the gallows. An American soldier named John Dolliboy was there. He later wrote, "The Germans walked through like zombies. Some cried. Most were stone-faced. Many claimed they had no idea. One woman kept repeating, 'We didn't know, we didn't know.' But how could they not smell it?" The camp was 4 miles from the town center. The military filmed these tours. The footage still exists. You can see German women in their clean dresses walking past skeletal corpses. German men in suits staring at piles of shoes and eyeglasses. Children being led past the crematorium ovens. Some Germans genuinely seemed shocked. They fainted. They wept. They couldn't process what they were seeing. For them, the gap between what they suspected and the reality was too vast. Others seemed more angry than shocked. Angry that they were being made to see it. Angry that they were being blamed. There's footage of German civilians arguing with American soldiers. We are not responsible. This was the SS. We didn't do this. In Landsberg, near Dachau, the Americans made German civilians bury the dead. They dug graves. They carried corpses. They covered them with dirt. An American photographer captured it all. The Americans also posted photographs of the camps in every German town. They required Germans to attend screenings of documentary footage. They plastered posters on walls showing camp atrocities with captions like, "This is your fault." A German teenager named Heinz Schmidt later recalled, "I was 16 when the Americans made us watch the camp films. I vomited. I couldn't believe Germans had done this. My father sat next to me, stone-faced. After, I asked him if he knew. He said, 'Not like this.' But yes, I knew something. I never saw my father the same way after that day." The denazification questionnaires also revealed how much Germans knew. Every German had to fill out a form detailing their Nazi Party involvement, their actions during the war, what they knew. Most claimed ignorance, but the documents often contradicted themselves. A factory manager would claim he didn't know about camp labor, but records showed his factory requested prisoner workers. A railway official would claim he didn't know about deportation trains, but schedules showed his signature on the orders. The Allies realized quickly, proving what individual Germans knew was nearly impossible. But proving that German society as a whole knew enough to have acted, that was easy. So what did German civilians actually know about the Holocaust? Here's the answer. It depends on the person, the location, and the time period. But as a general pattern, by 1941, virtually every German knew Jews were being persecuted and deported. By 1942, millions of Germans knew or suspected that Jews were being killed in large numbers in the East. By 1943, the rumors and fragments of information were so widespread that deliberate ignorance was the only way to avoid knowing. Did most Germans know the specific mechanics of Auschwitz? The gas chambers, the crematoria, the selection ramps? Probably not in detail. Did most Germans know Jews were dying in massive numbers, that they weren't coming back, that something terrible was happening? Yes, they knew enough. The historian Ian Kershaw studied this question extensively. He concluded, the road to Auschwitz was paved with indifference. Most Germans weren't active perpetrators, but most Germans were passive enablers. They didn't pull triggers or operate gas chambers, but they looked away. They accepted propaganda. They told themselves comfortable lies. They prioritized their own lives over the lives of their neighbors. After the war, this created a massive psychological problem for Germans. How do you live with the knowledge that you were part of a society that committed genocide? How do you explain it to your children? Many Germans chose denial. They convinced themselves they truly hadn't known. They created a narrative of collective victimhood. We suffered too. We were bombed. We lost sons and husbands. Others faced it more honestly. The writer Gunnar Grass, who served in the Waffen-SS as a teenager, spent his career wrestling with German guilt. He wrote, "We cannot claim we didn't know. The information was there. We chose not to see it." In the 1960s and 70s, a new generation of Germans confronted their parents and grandparents. They demanded answers. The question, "What did you know?" echoed through German families. Some families broke apart over it. Children learned their parents had been party members, had benefited from Aryanized property, had worked in industries connected to camps. Trust shattered. Today, historians agree on certain facts. The Holocaust was not hidden from German society. Information circulated constantly, despite official secrecy. Most Germans knew enough to understand that something horrific was happening to Jews. They chose, individually and collectively, not to act on that knowledge. Why does this matter now? Because the question, "What did they know?" is really asking, how could an educated, civilized society participate in genocide? And the answer is uncomfortable. It happens through thousands of small choices. A choice to look away. A choice to believe propaganda. A choice to prioritize personal safety over moral courage. A choice to believe that it's not your responsibility. A choice to tell yourself that you're powerless anyway. The Germans who lived through the Nazi era weren't monsters. That's what makes it so terrifying. They were ordinary people who made ordinary moral compromises until they found themselves living in a genocidal state. The survivors of the Holocaust have said repeatedly, "Remember what happened." Not just to memorialize the dead, but to understand how it happened. Because it can happen again. It has happened again in different places, in different forms. The question isn't just what Germans knew. The question is, what would you do with that knowledge? Would you speak out? Would you resist? Would you hide someone? Or would you, like most Germans, choose safety and silence? That's the question that haunts us still.